The Ostrich Effect. The Ostrich Effect happens when you avoid facing negative information or criticism, similar to how an ostrich hides by putting its head in the sand. For instance, you might avoid checking your bank account because you don't want to face how much you've spent. To combat this, make it a habit to assess your situation regularly, even if it's uncomfortable. The Spotlight Effect. The Spotlight Effect is the tendency to overestimate how much others notice your appearance, mistakes, or actions. To reduce this, remind yourself that most people are too preoccupied with their own concerns to pay attention to minor details about you. This can help ease anxiety and improve focus. Reciprocity. Reciprocity is when you feel compelled to return a favor when someone does something for you. For example, you might feel obligated to buy something after receiving a free sample. To avoid falling into this, recognize whether you're acting out of genuine desire or merely out of obligation. The self-serving bias. The self-serving bias occurs when you take credit for successes but blame external factors for failures. For instance, you might think that your victory was due to skill, while a loss was simply bad luck. To counter this, practice owning up to your actions, whether they result in success or failure. The contrast effect. The contrast effect is when your perception of something is influenced by what you've seen right before. For example, real estate agents might show you a rundown house first, so that the next house they show looks much better by comparison, making you like it more. Chauffeur Knowledge. Chauffeur knowledge is when someone appears knowledgeable and confident, but lacks true expertise in a subject. They're similar to a parrot repeating memorized phrases without understanding. To spot these people, ask more in-depth questions, as they struggle to provide insightful answers. Difficulty in closing doors. This refers to the struggle of making decisions due to the fear of missing out on other opportunities. Imagine you're working on 3 different business ideas at once. Even though you know concentrating on one would be more productive, you hesitate to abandon the others, leading to mediocre or no progress across all 3. The solution is to focus on one task at a time. Negativity bias. Negativity bias is when you give more attention to negative experiences than positive ones. For example, you could receive 100 comments on a video, with 99 of them being positive, but you'll fixate on the single negative one. To overcome this, consciously shift your focus towards the positive and practice gratitude. The sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is when you continue doing something simply because you've already invested time, money, or effort in it, even when it's no longer the best choice. It's like finishing a bad meal just because you paid for it. To avoid this, focus on the best decision starting from today, considering future benefits rather than past investments. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias happens when people focus only on information that supports what they already believe. For example, if you think your favorite sports team is the best, you'll notice their victories more than their losses. To counter this, seek out information that challenges your perspective. This ensures you make decisions based on all the facts, not just what fits your narrative. The Bandwagon Effect. The Bandwagon Effect is when you follow the crowd, like buying the latest phone just because everyone else has it, not because you truly need it. To avoid this, ask yourself why you're making the choice. Is it something you really want, or are you just going along with the trend? The Gambler's Fallacy. The Gambler's Fallacy occurs when you believe past events influence future outcomes, particularly in random situations. For example, thinking you're due for a win after losing several coin tosses. Remember that each event is independent in random scenarios. This way, you'll base your decisions on logic, not false patterns. Reactance Bias. Reactance bias is when you want to do the opposite of what you're told because it feels like your freedom is being restricted. For example, not wanting to wear a seatbelt just because a sign says, you must. To avoid this, focus on how the action benefits you, rather than just doing it because you're being told to. Survivorship Bias. Survivorship bias occurs when you only notice the success stories and ignore the failures. For instance, thinking owning a business is all about wearing suits and sitting in fancy offices because that's what's shown in the media. You don't see the late nights, the risks, and the challenges behind the scenes. Before starting something new, ensure you research both sides of the story for a full picture. The unity principle. The unity principle suggests you're more likely to be persuaded by someone who feels like part of your group. For example, trusting a product more if the person selling it shares your background. To avoid this, base your choices on facts, not just who is presenting them. The ambiguity effect. The ambiguity effect is our tendency to shy away from unclear options, even if they might offer better results. For instance, ordering the same average dish at a restaurant instead of trying something new that you might love. Weigh the risks and rewards of uncertain choices. Taking a calculated risk can sometimes yield great benefits. The curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is when you forget what it was like not to know something, leading to poor communication. To avoid this, put yourself in the shoes of someone less experienced. Think about how you would explain it to your younger self who hasn't learned it yet. The endowment effect. The endowment effect is when you overvalue something simply because you own it. For example, holding on to old clothes you no longer wear, even though they're taking up space. To overcome this, try to view your belongings from an outsider's perspective. The IKEA Effect. The IKEA Effect refers to how people tend to value something more if they've invested effort into creating it, like assembling your own furniture. To avoid overestimating the worth of your work, seek feedback from others. This allows for a more objective evaluation of your efforts. The curse of specificity. The curse of specificity occurs when excessive detail makes something seem more convincing, even if the details aren't relevant. For instance, I could tell you it's 8:16 p.m., and I'm sitting in a cozy yellow chair at Starbucks, sipping a rich cappuccino while typing on my laptop. You might easily picture this scene, and it could sound convincing. But the truth is, I'm at home, distracted by the noise of my 5-year-old daughter playing nearby. The Diderot Effect. The Diderot Effect refers to the tendency to make additional purchases after acquiring something new, like buying a new outfit, and then feeling compelled to upgrade other things to match. To prevent this, be aware of how one purchase might affect your overall spending habits. The anchoring effect. The anchoring effect happens when your first impression or an initial number influences your future judgments. For example, seeing a $50 shirt might seem inexpensive after looking at a similar one priced at $200. To avoid this, always evaluate offers and choices on their own merits, not in comparison to what you saw first. The paradox of choice. The paradox of choice happens when having too many options makes decision-making more difficult. For example, browsing a menu with 50 dishes can feel overwhelming. To combat this, limit the number of options for yourself or others. If you're selling something, highlight a top recommendation to make decision-making easier. The framing effect. The framing effect occurs when your choices are influenced by how the information is presented. For instance, a doctor might tell you there's a 90% chance of survival, which feels more reassuring than hearing there's a 10% chance of death, though both are the same. Always consider information from different angles before making a decision. The end of history illusion. The end of history illusion is the belief that who you are now is who you'll always be. To challenge this, embrace the possibility of change. Acknowledge that your opinions, tastes, and preferences will evolve over time. The Pygmalion Effect. The Pygmalion Effect suggests that higher expectations can lead to improved performance. For example, aiming to reach a 1-year goal in just 3 months will boost your productivity. Consistency principle. The consistency principle is based on the desire to align with past actions or statements. For instance, if you tell your friends you're going to start working out regularly, you'll be more likely to follow through. Having someone hold you accountable can greatly improve your commitment to achieving your goals. Loss aversion. Loss aversion is when the fear of losing something outweighs the motivation to gain something. For example, avoiding a great investment opportunity because you're scared of losing money. To overcome this, focus on potential gains and not just the fear of loss. The Decoy Effect. The Decoy Effect occurs when a less appealing third option alters your preference between two others. For example, you might choose a medium-sized popcorn because it seems like a bargain compared to the large size. To avoid this, evaluate each option on its own to make the best choice for you. The halo effect. The halo effect happens when your perception of one quality of a person affects how you judge them in other areas. For example, you might think someone is trustworthy just because they dress well or are attractive. To avoid this, evaluate each situation and decision based on the actual facts. The availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is when you judge the likelihood of something happening based on how easily you can recall it. For instance, you might think plane crashes are common because you've seen news coverage of recent accidents. To counter this, rely on actual statistics and data before forming judgments. Hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is the tendency to believe, after an event has happened, that you predicted the outcome, even though you didn't. For instance, claiming you knew it all along after a game ends. The Zeigarnik Effect. The Zeigarnik Effect explains why uncompleted tasks stay on your mind more than completed ones. For instance, constantly thinking about an unfinished report. Leverage this by planning your next day the night before. By making a plan, your subconscious works on it in the background, giving you clarity and ideas when you wake up. The Bystander Effect. The Bystander Effect happens when you're less likely to help someone in need if others are around. For example, not voicing your thoughts in a meeting because you assume someone else will. The Planning Fallacy. The planning fallacy is the tendency to underestimate how long tasks will take. For example, thinking you can clean your entire house in 1 hour. To avoid this, always allow extra time, helping you plan your day more efficiently and reduce stress. The Dunning-Kruger Effect. The Dunning-Kruger Effect describes how people with less knowledge or skill often overestimate their abilities. It's like reading a few investment books and thinking you're an expert. To avoid this, consult with experts, especially when it comes to making important decisions. Action bias. Action bias is the pressure to do something, even when doing nothing might be the wiser choice, like feeling you need to act during a slow period in business when waiting could be more beneficial. To overcome this, consider the value of patience. Sometimes, taking no action is the best decision. Illusion of averages. The illusion of averages is the false belief that average numbers always give the full picture. For instance, imagine riding in a car with 2 friends, then Elon Musk joins. Suddenly, the average wealth in the car is sky high, but it doesn't reflect reality for everyone. This is why, especially in business and investing, you should dig deeper beyond the averages.